What's up, everybody? Michael Walsh here. So this video is in response to all the news that's been circulating around Ilia Topuria ducking Arman Tsarukyan. And I've read the quotes, I've seen what he said. This is ducking. Per what he said, this is ducking, okay? Now, sure, there's stuff to unpack, because I wouldn't criticize Ilia if he was just taking a dig at Arman for, not making it to the Islam fight, And I'll say this, I don't trust the UFC's story on that. I don't know if he got injured. I don't know if it was truly a weight miss. If it was truly a weight miss, obviously it makes more sense to, kick Arman to the back a bit, make him fight at least one more time. Like, that makes more sense. If it's an injury, I think that's unnecessarily punitive. But I don't know the story, and I don't trust the UFC. If it were an injury, you'd think maybe Arman would defend himself more. But at the same time, maybe he's worried about repercussions. Maybe he knows he's not on their good side. Maybe he knows that they don't give a shit whether he was injured or if it was a weight miss. They just give a shit they didn't show up. But even there, Arman's been willing to resist the UFC. He refused the Gamrot fight, for example. So maybe it is more telling that he's not defending himself. But in any case, I'm agnostic about it. I don't know the truth. I'm not willing to trust the UFC at all. So that is what it is. I get it if Ilia wants to throw shade at him about it. I get it. And I get Ilia. I honestly get it that he doesn't want to do a full fight camp for the guy to not show up. I get that. However, he literally said that if the UFC says, no, he's the top contender, we don't give a shit if he didn't make it to the Islam fight, he's up next, Patty and Gaethje are going to fight, or something like that. Like, he said that if they told that to him, he would vacate. That is ducking. Now, we don't know. Like, he did not say, I'll never fight Arman, as far as I've read. He instead said, I won't fight him if they offer him next without forcing him to fight someone else first and prove that he can make the weight and everything. So hypothetically, if they would have said, like, hey, we're going to make Patty fight Arman for the #1 contender spot, Arman shows up, he makes weight, he wins, he's up next. Hypothetically, Ilia is agreeing to fight him under those circumstances. However, he did say, I will vacate before fighting him next, as in his next opponent and Arman's next opponent, with no fight in between for Arman. That is ducking. Straight up ducking. And I've heard it compared by people. It is comparable to what John Jones did with Tom Aspinall and with Stipe Miocic. And that's a really bad fucking look, because Ilia is on this trajectory where I'm rooting for him. I'm a fan of the guy. Like, I like Ilia. I like his fighting style. I like his skill set. I just like watching all-time greats, or people who appear to be all-time greats. I like watching their ascension. If you were there to see John Jones on the come-up, if you were there to see Mighty Mouse on the come-up, if you were there to see, Anderson Silva's title reign, or, if you were there to see Volkanovski's ascension, Holloway's ascension, like, it was great to see. It was captivating. Like, it affects you. You look back on it for the rest of your life. And it's like, it would be nice if that's what we're seeing here, if that's what Ilia is going to be. If Ilia is going to go down as one of the GOATs, I want to see it. And I was even kind of rooting for him against Oliveira. Like, I like Oliveira more. Oliveira is one of my favorite fighters. But I knew Oliveira is long in the tooth. He's past it. It would be a feel-good story, but in the grand scheme of things, it would be worse for the sport if he won than if Ilia won and went on to do all these great things. So I was kind of okay with it that he knocked Oliveira out. And I like the guy. Like, I like him in interviews. I like his charisma on the mic. I like his brand of trash talk. I like the Rose gimmick. Like, I'm an Ilia Topuria fan. I want to see him do well. If he fights Islam, I'm rooting for him. I'm not rooting for Islam. But this is a bad look. I don't like this at all. Because I've mentioned in some of my previous videos, like I talked about this in my GOAT list video, but, I've sort of weighed in on the where does Ilia stand, not just pound for pound, but in the GOAT discussion. Where does, what do these 3 wins that he's put together, what do they do for him? And I think most people are going to one extreme or the other, but I side with the people that say these are old men. Volk, old man. Charles, old man. Even Max, the least old of the 3, but I do argue that Max, despite coming off of that amazing win over Justin Gaethje, and despite being a live dog in that fight with Ilia, was nevertheless past his prime. That is not the Max that Volk beat 3 times. Still great wins. Still wins over the number 1 and number 2 featherweight and the number 3 or whatever Oliveira is lightweight. And regardless of name value, that's just wildly impressive to do that in title fights, to knock all 3 of them out. Wildly impressive. Gives him an argument for pound number 1 status at the moment. It's either him or Islam. But as far as the big picture, as far as what he's trying to do, as far as trying to become this multi-divisional great who goes down as possibly the GOAT of the sport, the name value is deceptive. It's making it look like what he did is better than it is. Because it's making it look like he beat, 2 of the top 10 fighters to ever live and 1 of the top 15, 20, 30 fighters to ever live, back to back to back to back, all knockouts. And on paper he did, but in reality he didn't, because those guys weren't their fucking primes. Okay? And that's all well and good if he goes on to fight the Armins of the world. Or if Paddy can beat Armin, the Paddies of the world. Actual young people in their prime who prove they're the second best in the world behind Ilia. Like, if he starts beating those guys, that's true greatness. That's, now he's entering GOAT discussions. If he can start doing that, on multiple occasions. But instead, he's going this John Jones route, because that was John Jones's argument for avoiding Aspinall, was, what's this going to do for my legacy? Tom could be a splash in the pan. He might not be remembered that well in years to come. Stipe Miocic is the best heavyweight ever, which he isn't, it's Fedor, but Stipe Miocic is the best heavyweight ever. He's a former champion. He's got a name. He's a name that will look good on my resume, so that when people look at my fucking Wikipedia page 10 years from now, they're going to see his name and go, wow, he fought Stipe Miocic. They're not going to do that for Tom Aspinall, so he argued. And that's effectively all Ilia is doing. He's saying, I'm not going to fight the obvious hardest fight, the obvious number 1 contender, the obvious most deserving dude, the guy who people in the know will actually give me the most credit for beating, in the same way people in the know would give John Jones way more credit for beating Tom Aspinall than for beating, the deceased carcass of Stipe Miocic. Despite all that, Ilia clearly wants easier, bigger name fights. I'd wager he wants a Gaethje or a Paddy instead. One of whom is an aging legend, and one of whom is in his prime, but hasn't proven himself yet. I think it was Jack Slack who compared him, and I think Luke Thomas might have made his comparison too, but compared him to a Joaquin Buckley. He's on this good streak, he's looking good at the moment, but it's all against old guys. It's against Chandler, it's against Bobby Green, it's against Tony Ferguson. Those are the guys Paddy's coming off wins against. And I actually like Paddy, and I'm not a Paddy hater. I actually kind of like the guy, but he is not the number 1 contender. Armin Tsarukyan is the number 1 contender, and Ilia is making it clear that if he actually has to fight him, he will vacate. As the sitting champion, he will vacate. And that is ducking. And that, to me, is terrible for what he's trying to do as far as becoming an all-time GOAT. Because, the title of this video suggested I'm comparing him unfavorably to some great Japanese fighter. That's exactly what I'm going to do, because what sprung to mind to me was Sakuraba. Okay? Sakuraba in his prime was the star of Pride. He was the biggest name in Pride FC. He was the face of the company. He was the most beloved fighter in the company. He was a star. Okay? He could have done something like Ilia's doing. He could have picked his fights. He could have only taken money fights or gimme fights, only squashed tomato cans. He could have only fought, people with big names, but who were old and where the matchup favored him. People smaller than him maybe. He could have done things like that because he had the clout. But and Pride wasn't above feeding you fucking cans, because even Wanderlei Silva, even Fedor Emelianenko, even Mirko Cro Cop, greats of their division. Fedor, one of the all-time GOATs, best heavyweight ever. look at their Pride runs, like there are cans on the record. You know, they would give you cans. So contrast that with Sakuraba, again, the star of the company, and a man, for those who don't know, like a small guy. Like, you know, his weight fluctuated, but it seems like he generally was like 175, maybe 180. He was like 5'11". He wasn't very muscular. He was pudgy. He didn't have a six-pack. So that's like a chubby 175, 180. So we're talking about a guy who, if he were cutting weight properly, like today he'd be a lightweight. And even back then he'd at most be a welterweight and possibly still be a lightweight. We're talking about a guy who is smaller, I would wager, in terms of frame and mass and everything, smaller than Paddy Pimblett. And Paddy Pimblett comes to mind, not just because we've been talking about him, because he idolizes Sakuraba, he wears his shorts. But like, compare the two. Sakuraba is smaller than Pimblett. And look at who Sakuraba fought. Sakuraba, in his prime, only lost to one dude. His name was Nino something, I forget, he was a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu champion. Sakuraba lost to him, but then avenged the win later, beat him in the rematch. Aside from that, everyone Sakuraba lost to, and there were a lot of them. If you look at his record, it's one of those old records, you know, it's like Randy Couture or something, where it's like very checkered with wins and losses. You might say, oh, how can this guy be so great? Look how often he lost. But just look at who he lost to. Because Sakuraba, again, his only prime loss to someone actually his size was that Nino guy. Everyone else, Chemo in his first fight ever. Vanderlei Silva 3 times. Krokop, Igor Vovchanchyn, Ricardo Arona, Rogerio Nogueira. These are the absolute killers at light heavyweight and heavyweight. You know, Sakuraba, sitting Pride champion, fought him 3 times, lost all 3 times, but kept fighting him. And this is, you know, this is prime Vanderlei. This is Vanderlei on steroids. This is Vanderlei when he's allowed to stomp on your head, when he's allowed to soccer kick you, when he's allowed to knee in the head when you're on the ground. That's the guy that this chubby lightweight was fighting. Okay? And he took those fights as the star of the company. And he took other fights against big dudes whom he beat. Like, he beat Vitor Belfort. He beat Kevin Randleman. He beat Quentin Jackson. And he had great wins against guys who were like actually appropriately sized opponents for him. Like, they called him the Gracie Hunter because he cleaned house on the Gracies. He broke Renzo Gracie's arm. He submitted Hoyler. He beat up Hyan. He gave Hoist Gracie his first ever loss in one of the most iconic fights of all time. It went for an hour and a half before Hoist surrendered, you know, threw in the towel. Like, that's who Sakuraba was. He submitted Carlos Newton, former UFC welterweight champion. Like, that's who Sakuraba was. But, unlike, you know, and just contrast that with what Topuria is doing. And Sakuraba is underrated in the all-time GOAT discussion, I'll say that. Like, I'm not saying he's top 10, top 20, but when you start getting into that top 30, top 40, top 50, there's an argument for him to show up there somewhere, and he's always overlooked. And again, it's like, you see he lost a lot, but look at who he lost to. He didn't just lose to big guys. He lost to the dangerous big guys. Again, Krokop, Vovchanchyn, Vanderlei Silva. You know, and beat other dangerous guys. Beat Quentin Jackson. Submitted him. Submitted Kevin Randleman. You know? Like, Sakuraba, he took those fights because he was a fighter first. He was a martial artist first. He was a warrior first. And he was a star second. He was a moneymaker second. He was a status seeker second. He was a resume builder second. Okay? And I'm not saying everyone needs to do that. I'm not saying that you need to take every fight the company offers you and just be a company man and let them walk all over you. I'm not saying you can't put any thought into building your career, into planning your route to the title, into trying to build the best legacy for yourself. I'm not saying you have to jump weight classes. I'm not saying you have to do those things. You know? But if you want to be considered one of the greats, if you want to maybe even be considered the great of all time, when it's all said and done, like Ilia does, and like Ilia's fans imagine for him, if you want that, then you need to bring some of that energy. You need to embrace some of that mindset. Because if you won't even fight Arman when the UFC tells you you're supposed to, when they say, no, we're honoring the fact that he's the number 1 contender, we're honoring the fact that Paddy and Justin are not the number 1 contenders, and we're giving you Arman next. If you still turn that down, you know, if you're unwilling to take, because you could, even if you're worried that he's not going to show up, even if you're worried he'll miss weight or get hurt or something, we have backup fighters. We've had backup fighters for plenty of title fights at this point. You know, it's been a practice, you know, if memory serves, I mean, I want to say the first time they started kind of publicly doing that was like Colby and Usman, wasn't it? But like, you know, this is common practice now, and people have done it. Islam fought Moicano on short notice when fucking Arman pulled out, you know? And I'm not saying I always hold it against the champion when they refuse to fight someone on short notice, but that's the stuff that adds to your legacy. That's the stuff that makes you great. And that's the stuff that makes me respect you as a fighter. You know, that's the stuff that makes you beloved by fans and makes them look back on you years later the way I'm looking back on Sakuraba right now. Because, tell you what, if Ilia does this other shit, if he avoids Arman, maybe he fights Paddy or Justin and maybe he wins, maybe he goes up to welterweight and maybe he beats an old Islam at that point, maybe Islam beats JDM, but then by the time they fight, Islam's 36, because he's already fucking 33, you know? Maybe he's 34, 35, 36, you know? Maybe Topuria beats him, and then maybe he just leaves. And it's like, you beat nothing but old men and an undeserving Paddy at that point, and you're just gonna fuck off. You know, we can all see it happening. You know, and that at that point, that's the Conor McGregor route, that's the Henry Cejudo route, and that's not the kind of shit that's gonna make you be looked at fondly and, you know, to make the fans, you know, love you the way they love a guy like Sakuraba. And it's not even gonna age well as far as the GOAT discussion. People might call you the GOAT in that moment, but they're gonna look back in years and they're not gonna rank it well. Okay, just like they don't look at what Conor did, they don't look at what Henry did. You know, and Henry's underrated. But nevertheless, like, because there were GOAT discussions at the time when those guys did that shit. It didn't take long for those accomplishments to age poorly. And for people to say, well, you know, what did they actually prove with that? You know, they proved something. They proved they were great, but did they prove they were truly among the very greats? You know? And it's going to be the same with Ilia. And it's frustrating because, you know, it'd be nice to see the guy deliver. It'd be nice to see the guy be willing to take on all the top contenders at lightweight and reserve, you know, whatever the big finale is going to be at welterweight against Islam or whoever. Like, it'd be nice to see him actually earn some GOAT status, for him to actually beat some prime young guys, for him to actually take on the tough matchups. You know? Because imagine the alternative. Imagine he says, yeah, fuck Arman, I'll fight that guy, fuck that guy, you know? And he beats him, he knocks him out. Imagine that happens. Imagine Islam loses to JDM, and imagine Ilia says, you know what? Fuck you, Islam. I guess you weren't that good. I'm going to go do what you couldn't do. I'm going to go fight JDM. Imagine he does that, imagine he knocks out JDM. All of a sudden, warranted GOAT discussions. Very warranted. And I'm not saying I'd pick him to do that. I wouldn't pick him to beat JDM. I'm not sure I'd pick him to beat Islam. I'm not sure I'd pick him to beat Arman. But these are the things he needs to do if he wants to be considered the best to ever live. You know, and that, from what I've seen and heard, that does seem like the thing he wants to do. But I'm worried he's going to try to do it the fraudulent way. He's going to try to do it the John Jones way. He's going to try to do it just on name value. Just on convenient matchups, you know. Just on beef and selling fights and, you know, just based on hype and attention and not based on merit. And again, it's just hard not to romanticize the fighters of the past. It's hard not to look at someone like Sakuraba. Again, can't say this enough times. The star of the company could have done shit like this. Could have just fought pro wrestlers and shit. Didn't. Fought Igor Vovchanchyn, fought Krokop, fought Wanderlei Silva, fought Quentin Jackson, fought Vitor Belfort, fought Kevin Randleman. You know? Fought Ricardo Arona, fought Rogerio Nogueira. You know? Showed up every time, fought his heart out. Took his licks. You know? And I don't know. You wish for more for the sport.